Hello, welcome back to another Theory Thursday. Today we're not going over a musical theory concept, but another guitar theory concept. And it's an important one that every guitarist has to consider at some point. And that question is, what strings do I use? How do you know what strings to choose? There's so many options out there. How do you know where to start? Well, let's talk about it. First of all, I got my Mickey Mouse watch on today. I got my brown knit tie on today. And if you've been enjoying these, please like the videos and subscribe if you want to stay in the loop about when new videos come out. I'm sure you already know, every Tuesday we have a new tune come out. Every Thursday we have a new video like this come out about theory concepts, whether it's basic music theory or guitar theory. And then at the end of every month, we have a new solo guitar video that I release. So, without further ado, what strings do you use? Let's talk about it. So, there's so many decisions to make when you get into guitar. First thing you decide is, what kind of guitar do you want to get? Well, that comes down to personal preference. What are your goals? If you want to be a rocker, you want to follow in Slash's footsteps. You probably don't want to go out and buy a classical guitar, right? You probably want a Les Paul, right? You're looking at Gibson or Epiphone, and you're looking at electrics, right? You're not looking at Cordobas or Yamaha classicals, right? So personal preference there. Then when you actually get the guitar, it's, well, what strings do I choose? It's the same thing. And we're talking broad today, okay? Of course it all comes down to personal preference. And of course it comes down to what kind of guitar do you have and what kind of exact sound do you want. All right, so we're talking broad today. Broad concepts, and it's not just a one size fits all. If you want this, well then here's what you got to use. Right, it's much more nuanced than that, but this is a great place to start. Okay, we're going to talk about the big differences between the strings, and if you want a certain sound, what ballpark to start in. Okay, that's the disclaimer, because I know there's going to be someone in the comments saying, well, you didn't mention this. If you want this sound, it should be these strings and blah 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 blah. Whatever, we're talking about broad stuff today. Okay, and if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, we can talk about that in the comments or on another video, or of course I try to answer all the questions anyway. So anyway, first things first, we're going to separate this into two categories. We have our acoustics and we have our electrics. Okay, now acoustics would be your steel strings, your classical guitars, right, and your resonator guitars. And I don't have one of those, but I'll put a picture up somewhere here. It's with the big metal body. It sounds really cool. But yeah, we're going to classify those all as acoustics. And on the electric side, we have our solid body electrics and our hollow body and semi-hollow, right? Those are in the same thing, like same category, right? Our solid bodies, our semi-hollows, and our full hollow bodies, okay? I'm going to classify all those on the same side, okay? So first off, you need to decide which one of these do you have, right? That's the first thing to figure out, okay? So let's talk about acoustic stuff first, okay? There's a couple different things you can look at. First of all, if you have a classical guitar, and of course the first thing you're going to ask is, John, how do I know if I have a classical guitar? Take a look at it. The top three strings, that's going to tell you, the first thing that's going to tell you. If those look like they're made out of plastic, you have a classical guitar, right? They're nylon. That's what we call nylon strings. Second place to look is the bridge. If the bridge has strings that are tied off in knots, you probably have a classical guitar. If they are tied off with little knobs on the end of the string that are being held in with a hole, you probably have a steel string. Okay, now that's not a general. That's just a general statement. That's not a this is this and that's that. I've seen classical guitars with the little knobs, and I've seen steel strings that you can tie. Okay, very very rare. But that's just the second place to look. Third place to look is on the headstock. If you have a tuning peg and the strings are wrapped on the x-axis rather than the y-axis, you probably have a classical guitar. Okay, so those are the first places to look. And if you are still unsure, ask in the comments. Send me a picture. I'll tell you right away what it is. Or I'm sure someone else in the community will let you know. So that's the first thing to decide. So looking at these two guitars, if you have a classical guitar, you're going to want to look at nylon strings. Okay, you do not want to put steel strings on a guitar like that because the guitar is built for a very specific tension. Okay, and those metal strings that you put on a steel string have a higher tension, and it's possible it just rips the bridge right off, right? If you haven't been humidifying or taking care of it. So just you're looking at nylon strings, and that's pretty much it. You don't want to put steel strings on a classical guitar. Okay, so the most popular are these Pro Artes, and I think most of the guitar strings I have here, these are just examples, but most of them I have here are D'Addario, if that's how you pronounce it, D''Addario. So I'll put some pictures up too they're a little bit higher quality, but this is what you're looking for. Something that says nylon on it. Okay, so you say nylon core. Silver plated wound clear nylon. Okay, so what that means is they're all nylon strings, and on the lower strings, right, the EAD, they're wound with they're silver plated. So that's what that is. They're all nylon strings, but the lower strings are wound, and you'll see that across all the strings, but we'll get to that. So that's the first thing, is you're narrowed down to nylon strings. Okay, and you can look at different brands, you can look at different tensions and gauges and everything. The other thing to consider here is what we call string gauge. Now, a pack of nylon strings like this, it's not very prominently displayed. Usually what you'll see is a tension setting, right? And this says normal tension. This is middle of the road, right? Just beginner, stuff like that. Whereas, like, let's take a look at this. You see two numbers at the top here, 10 and 46. Or we'll go here. Here's a 12 and a 54. Or here's an 11 and a 50. Okay, what are those? Those are string gauges, okay? And what we're talking about here is the actual thickness of the string, okay? So what the heck does this mean? The lower number is the smallest string, right? Your high E string, that's the thinnest one. The bigger number is your low E string, the thickest one. What exactly are these numbers? Well, string gauges are measured in millimeters. So something like this would be, the top E string would be 0.010 millimeters thick. Whereas the thickest string would be 0.046 millimeters thick. Okay, so we're measuring in millimeters, and we're at 0.0 something. So the thinnest string is 0.01, and that's why we call them tens. Okay, so something like this would be 0.011, and we call these 11s. Okay, so when you hear people talking about string gauges and thicknesses, and you'll go to a guitar shop and say, give me a pack of 10s, or give me a pack of 9s, or 11s. That's what they're talking about. The thinnest string, 0.0 something. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so that's string gauges. Anyway, continuing. When you're looking at classical strings, it's not displayed very prominently. But on the back here you can see 0.028. So that's a lot thicker than your normal electric string. Okay, electrics, we're looking at 0.01 or 0.009. So this is 0.02. But the tension is a lot less because it's not steel, right? It's not metal pulling. It's just nylon. So that's how they get away with that. So you can see on the back here, these are 0.028. Next string is 0.032, and on and on and on. The thickest string is 0.043, right? Very similar to this, 0.046. All that to say, you don't need to worry too much about it. If you're just looking at classical guitars, just look at the tension. That's going to be just enough for you. Nylon strings are very easy on your fingers, so don't worry too much about the thickness of it. It's going to be just fine. It's kind of like if you know ukulele strings, it's the same type of material. So that's classical guitar strings. Pro Arte, I would look into them. I think they're the most mainstream and middle of the road. So just go normal tension. You'll be just fine. Okay, so steel string guitar is something that's similar to classical, but we're dealing with steel strings, and usually the bodies are a little bigger, and you'll know if you have a steel string because the strings are all metal, and there'll be bridge pins in the bridge instead of knots, and on the top you'll be wrapping your strings around a vertical axis tuning peg instead of a horizontal. That's usually, like I said, it's a disclaimer. It's not always the case that that's the case, but usually that's the way it goes. So these are Ernie Ball. I just have a bunch of strings stowed away, so I actually don't know if I've put a pair of these on my guitar yet, so I have no idea if they're good, but we're just using them as an example. So if you remember the classical strings, we're talking about tension. It even says classical guitar in the corner here. The gauges are not prominently displayed, right? They're on the back. These are silver plated, wound nylon strings, right? All the strings are nylon. So the difference here is, first of all, it says right here, the gauge is 12 to 54, which is bigger than the nylon ones, the lowest one. And on the back, you can see all the string gauges: 12, 16, 24, 32, 44, 54. And again, that's 0.012 is the thinnest string. 0.054 is the thickest string. That's in millimeters. Okay, so the strings are just generally bigger. And the other thing is it's phosphor bronze. You can get the nickel plated or silver plated, but the biggest difference is the actual string. The core of the string is steel or some sort of metal, right? It's not nylon. So the tension is going to be a lot tighter. It's going to be a lot harder on your fingers, but the sound's going to be bigger, and it's going to sound a lot more crisp, less mellow, but more crisp than a classical guitar, okay? So starting off on steel string, 12s I think is the top of the, I wouldn't go over 12 if you're beginning, right? I mean, you can go down to 10s. I would not go down to 9s just because you need the string tension, but I would say start at 10s if you can find them, and just work your way up from that. 11, I'd say, is middle of the road. 12 is also kind of middle of the road. Once you're an experienced player, most of the people use 12s. But I don't know if I would start there if you're just beginning, because it's really tough on your fingers, right? The thicker the string, the harder the tension, harder it is to press down, depending on your setup, right? Your guitar setup and your action, everything. But that's where I would start. So these are Ernie Ball Paradigm. I have no idea if they're good. You can look at Diodario. You can look at Ernie Ball. You can look at, there's all kinds of them. But yeah, just I would start with, make sure they're steel strings, which most of them are. I think you have to go out of your way to find classical strings, to be honest. So this is going to be a lot easier. And 12 or below. That's if you are looking 12 and below, if you're beginning. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so just as a recap, if you're looking for classical strings, the main things you're looking for is making sure it says classical guitar or it says nylon strings, because you do not want steel strings. And if you're just starting off, getting normal tension strings. Okay, those are the two biggies. If you're looking at steel string guitars, steel string guitar strings, the main thing is making sure they're not nylon. That's really the basis of it. Every guitar shop is going to have some sort of acoustic string. These are 12s. I would recommend getting 10s, 11s, or 12s if you're just starting off. The thicker the string, the harder it's going to be on your fingers, just so you know. But the bigger the string, the bigger the sound. So there's some give and take with all of this. This is just what I had in the back of my closet. Ernie Ball Paradigms. Diodario also makes some, everyone makes acoustic strings, so that's what you're looking for there. Phosphor bronze, nickel plated, doesn't really matter. Just as long as they're steel strings and they're made for acoustics. So